My wife cheated on me during quarantine, but I didn't let it ruin my life. I feel that I have to give a bit of context leading up to the cheating. If not for you, for me, as writing is very therapeutic for me, and I need more trauma therapy than I've ever needed in my life. Please bear with me. I know this is long. My goal here is not to drag my wife's name in the mud and point all of the fingers at her. I'm going to try to keep this as balanced as I can by owning my mistakes while just giving the facts of her actions instead of who I feel she is as a person. I hate this because as I write this out, I feel like I deserve all of the blame, and in some cases, I do. But there are two sides to every story. I have a 14-year-old daughter from a previous marriage that ended in disaster. Long story short, my ex-wife was not a good person, and I needed to protect my daughter's safety. I got 100% custody, and the mom skipped out by moving from Texas to a European country, despite the trauma to myself and my daughter, who was 4 years old at the time. I fought to keep some sort of connection between the two. I set up virtual dates, either by phone or video. When that became more accessible, she hasn't always been present for our daughter. But it wasn't like her two other sons from two previous relationships, where there's been zero contact for 12 and 16 years, respectively. Needless to say, I was happy to be moving on with my life. It took me about 3 years, but I found what I felt was a tremendous woman who could potentially fill in as a mother to my daughter. This woman soon became my wife. 2 years later, I tend to find really good things in people, despite their flaws. I have so many flaws. Who am I to judge? I want someone who can see the good things about me and not sweat the small stuff I saw. I saw who my wife was, to her core, and fell in love with her. She is the most hardworking person I've ever met. Things didn't start off very well in the stepmother slaughter arena, because at this point, my daughter's biological mother was pulling away. She stopped paying child support and stopped showing up for some virtual dates. I was quickly placed in the middle between a 7-year-old little girl who didn't understand why her real mom wasn't around, and a woman I was falling in love with. The next 3 years were incredibly intense, and I did not handle the stress of that very well. As my soon-to-be wife told me, all of the things I did wrong in raising my daughter all by myself, I did the best I could. Over the next couple of years in this new relationship, my father lost his wife to lung cancer. My stepmother, who was like a mother to me, my father, who got diagnosed with emphysema, lost his house, and I had him move in with me. So at this point, it's me, my new wife, our newborn baby son that we just had, and my daughter from a previous marriage. I handle my stress in two ways. I either overeat because I grew up incredibly poor and never had any food, or I get very loud and angry and yell. This is my biggest struggle, and I work on it every single day. There have been days where I was angry all of the time because not only was I placed in the middle between my new wife and daughter, but my wife and father, who isn't very easy to live with. The larger I grew in weight gain, the more I grew angry from the overwhelming stress. It got to a point where I yelled at my preteen daughter a lot. I got in her face, I said hurtful things, and I scared her unintentionally because I couldn't take the middleman's stress. My wife placed me in the attitude I was receiving from my child. I even temporarily kicked my father out of the house for a year, and he wound up being homeless and living out of his car. I was afraid every single day that I'd find him dead in his car because he had no place to go and slept in the parking lot of our apartment in the winter. More recently, things have been rocky with my wife for years. At this point, we now have a 2-year-old son and found out she was pregnant with our youngest son. We started seeing a marriage counselor and had been going to therapy solo as well. Just before Christmas 2019, we were under a great deal of stress. Things were still bad between her and me. We barely had sex for the last 3 years, maybe 30 times in that time period. Despite the stress, I felt the therapy was helping, and my anger was well managed, but it wasn't completely gone. Around this time, our youngest son contracted the flu and couldn't stop throwing up. Tensions were high, and despite everything going on, my wife found ways to push every button that I had. When we got home, she kept telling me that she couldn't rely on me to take care of our son, despite me telling her to go home and rest since she was sick. As I continued to sleep in the hospital next to our little boy, who had just turned 2, I confronted her about her accusations, and she showed no remorse for it and continued to push those buttons. I had a car seat next to my feet where I was standing, and I picked it up and threw it on the opposite side of the house in frustration, away from my wife. I had no idea, but my mother-in-law was lying on the couch where it landed. Despite how I felt about her, I felt horrible for what I did. I then had to put up with my mother-in-law telling me that I needed to be on medication. I was on medication, and she acted as if I was the only one at fault here. I wasn't privately, but I got my wife to admit her actions that led to the argument. However, when it came to her mother, she refused to stand up for me as my mother-in-law berated me. My mother-in-law was a case of the pot calling the kettle black to the extreme. The whole situation was really bad, but this incident was a turning point for my anger. For the last 7 months, my anger has been mostly controlled. I was truly becoming a strong father figure and a loving husband. I was able to fully open up to my therapist about my past that I had repressed and discovered that I had an entire childhood of sexual and physical abuse. I've been sodomized by a family member. I was raped by kids down the street from my grandparents' house, and I was molested by a guy at a motel where we lived. I also recalled that I was physically abused by a babysitter for a while, and I was even abused by my mother. This is why I've been so angry, and I was making a huge breakthrough in my life. I was so proud to share my progress and self-discoveries with my wife. My wife and I have been working from home during the quarantine, and as you can imagine, the tensions have been high for the last couple of months or so. She's been spending a lot of time away from the house, anywhere from 4 to 5 days a week. She's either going to work out with our daycare provider, who she is friends with, or going out with coworkers. I felt that the space between us was a good thing since we've been cooped up for so long. I felt my marriage was getting back on track. We even started to have a little more sex after some heart-to-heart talks about how my weight and her weight had impacted the pleasure for her. It really all made sense, because her whole life, she's never been a very sexual person due to her own sexual traumas. I was feeling so good that I was even writing a self-help article to share my discoveries with others so I could help anyone who needed it. Over the last couple of weeks, I started to grow suspicious of my wife's outings. A lot of things didn't add up. She started tucking her phone away when I walked by her, which she never did. The conversations between us just felt different. A week before our anniversary, she had plans to go eat dinner with a coworker. We both knew. She kissed me goodnight and told me that she loved me. It wasn't a quick peck from someone you're obligated to kiss. There was love in there, or so I thought. Her dinner ran late, and it turned into a text message of her telling me she was going to play pool and that she loved me while sharing some kissy emojis, which was completely out of character for her. I knew something was wrong. It now turned 12:30 a.m., when she should have been home around 9:10 p.m., and I still hadn't heard from her. I had put both our sons to bed, and I sat up waiting for her, extremely concerned because she did not return any of my texts. I was able to log into her Google account and ping her device to see if she was in a location that would raise concerns, like being in an accident or broken down. She was in a town 40 miles away from our house, far from where she said she was supposed to be. I got in my car and drove over there to see if I could find her car. I arrived at 1 a.m. and was able to locate her car, parked in front of a house I did not recognize. It was around this time that my daughter texted me asking where I was. I don't know what it was about the conversation with her, but I felt she knew more than what she was saying. I kept telling her I was looking for her mother because I was worried and it wasn't normal. Even though I was standing behind her vehicle, I paced behind my wife's car for roughly an hour, and it was now 2 a.m. She still hadn't come out. Her car used to have an IS where if you open the car door, the car alarm would go off. I opened the door, and I remembered that we had gotten that fixed. No alarm went off. My hope was she would come out, and I wouldn't have to knock on a stranger's door to see if my wife was there. I desperately didn't want to go to anyone's house. The light in the car came on, and I could see her youth baseball bat she had for protection was sitting upright. At this point, I was still unsure if she was cheating on me. I was pretty sure she was, but there was a part of me that was holding out hope. I grabbed the bat and paced back and forth for another hour while my daughter was unusually concerned about why I was out looking for her. It felt like she was protecting her and kept telling me that I was overreacting. The more she told me I was overreacting, the more I acted panicked. She eventually told me her mother was out with a guy and gave me his address, the address that I was at. My wife told our daughter in advance that she was spending time with a guy she met on a dating app, and they both kept it from me. My heart instantly sank, and I walked up to the door. My daughter tried to convince me that they were just friends. I told her that she doesn't get dressed up the way she did to go drinking with a guy that she just wants to be friends with. While I was pacing, I could see a half-naked man walking back and forth. I decided to bring the bat with me for my protection. I had no idea what I was about to walk into, and I was concerned for my safety. That's when this young man, probably in his late 20s, answered the door. I told him my wife was in the house and that I needed to get her. He intentionally played stupid and acted confused. He immediately saw the bat and was concerned for his safety. I know the optics are bad. I explained to him that I was concerned and unsure of what was going on, and that it wasn't for me to be aggressive with. It was for protection. He believed me. It was at this point he said that maybe she's in his roommate's room. He told me that I didn't need the bat because he was very scrawny, but I refused to let go of it. He let me in the house and pointed to his roommate's bedroom. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. My heart sank even more. I was lost, confused, and scared. I turned around and looked at the roommate, and he knew what was going through my head, which is funny because I had no idea what was going on in my head. He said, "Don't do it, man," and it triggered something in me. I had so much instant adrenaline as I kicked the door open and saw my wife lying naked in bed with a naked man. For a split second, it did feel like reality. My anger came back, but not like it had in the past. It was an "I'm afraid" yelling. I was yelling, asking why the hell she was there. At this point, she had the audacity to yell at me and ask why I was there. The guy was a complete douchebag. He got up holding his dick and was giving a lot of smirks and making snide comments. It took everything inside of me not to react violently. I'm not a physically violent person, so it wasn't in me to do so. But I gripped that bat tightly as he walked out of the room. My wife continued to yell at me and even demanded that I leave the house so she could get dressed. I couldn't fathom how this conversation was playing out, but I reluctantly walked outside so I could get my wife out of the house. She's stubborn, and I knew she wouldn't leave if I didn't step outside. I stood outside the front door waiting, and I saw the guy walk into his garage because there's a house window from the patio to the garage. Then I watched my wife walk in there fully clothed. She hugged him and apologized to him for my actions. She had no idea. I could see my blood started to boil as I yelled at her for what she was doing. We didn't have much of a conversation outside, and I struggled to keep from vomiting all over the street outside of his house. I felt deeply ill, and my wife didn't even care about my feelings. This is the mother of my 3 children. This is the woman that I promised to spend the rest of my life with. This is the woman that I am deeply in love with, and she was treating me with a coldness that I've never experienced from her before. I'm devastated, crying, confused, and angry. I get home, and I'm desperately trying to find my child because I'm worried about her safety. This is when my wife gets home and my daughter comes out of the shadows. I tried to talk to my wife in a respectful and calm manner, but she wasn't having it. She was tired, as this was a work night, and she had to be online for work in 2 hours. It was at this point that my daughter told me that she wanted to move in with my wife, and that she wanted nothing to do with me anymore. She told me she'd only visit me out of obligation. This was the second dagger in my heart. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I didn't eat anything for 7 days and lost 17 pounds. The very smell of food made me nauseous. I got my wife to talk a little bit, and she told me her plan was to legally adopt my daughter with the intention of being a family, and then divorce me and take her from me. I later found out that my daughter was texting my wife and telling her she was trying to record my phone conversation with her to use against me in a court of law. The conversation was a phone conversation I had with her while I was finding my wife in bed with another man, and I had to wait outside his house while she got dressed. I was being conspired against. I felt betrayed. The last week and a half have been incredibly challenging. I drove to my hometown to be with my 3 kids and family through this tough time. I learned a lot from my daughter. I learned that my wife had been bad-mouthing me to her for a while. Now, they have been making fun of my body issues and sharing text conversations she was having with a guy she was sleeping with. They both kept referring to me as insane and crazy, like I was at fault here. I can't imagine how someone can drag a child into a very adult situation. As intelligent and mature as my daughter is, she's still a little girl. She doesn't understand any of this, and she's only getting one side of everything. My wife and daughter have really bonded because my wife has been spending our money on things like Starbucks so they could spend time together. It wasn't about the money, but it was about the quality time spent together. Whenever I wanted to spend money, I was always told we were broke. My wife obviously controlled the finances. I felt broke for 7 years now, but somehow she was always able to buy things on Amazon. My daughter absolutely has the right to be upset with me for the things I've put her through, but I feel it has been escalated by a shared experience with my wife while she badmouthed me. If my daughter was at a 4 out of 10 on an unhappy scale with me, the conversations with my wife bumped her up to a 10. My daughter even told me she encouraged my wife to seek male companionship. My anger has been bad throughout her life, and I'll pay for that for the rest of my life. But it hasn't been anything that has warranted the treatment I've been receiving. If you ask anyone who knows me, they will tell you how much I love my children and how I would do anything for them. Now my wife and daughter are wanting to put her non-biological daughter in our divorce decree. They want to make it legal. I'm so lost, confused, angry, lonely, hurt, and flabbergasted. I don't know how this story will be received here. I'm sure there will be some who rail on me about my anger and my actions, and those who are just as shocked as I am. I had hoped I would feel better after I typed this out, but I don't. I'm an absolute mess, and the person I need the most to help me get through this hates me, and I have no friends in this state that I can turn to. This hurts. We're amicably getting a divorce. I've had to swallow my pride and shove down my pain for the betterment of my children. If I make her hurt like I'm hurting, it only hurts my children, and that's not acceptable. Update 1. I had a really tough day on Monday for my own therapy. I'm going to be completely vulnerable as I open up myself to the world. For the most part, in any other context, none of these things should have and would have bothered me. But given recent events, I just couldn't breathe. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't remove images from my head. I was emotional and I was scared. It was really important for me to distance myself and my finances from my STBXW. She always gave me the sense that I couldn't handle finances on my own, because she directly told me so, and told me that I should leave my paychecks in her account until we officially separated. I couldn't do it. I needed to separate everything ASAP. I can handle my finances as I'm an adult and a high-functioning business professional. Unfortunately, I had a doctor's appointment for an unrelated reason to depression, but I felt I should write depression down as a secondary reason for being at my appointment. My doctor is amazing. She listened to me. She was compassionate and empathetic. She helped me, but she was concerned that I had these images flashing in my mind of self-harm. I don't know where these images came from or why they were all of a sudden appearing. Now, I don't think there was any will or desire behind these images, just suggestions placed in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes or blinked, I would never hurt myself. Life is never so bad for me to take my own life or hurt myself or those that I care for around me. I firmly believe that. But the images scared me. They began as images of me driving my car off a local dam because I had been driving. I decided to visit an old Little League baseball field I grew up on. I parked in the parking lot trying to figure out why I never got paid. Every direct deposit I had coming in was rejected. There were 3 of them. I drove to my bank at 9 a.m., but due to COVID, they didn't open until 10 a.m. I had music playing, and every time I closed my eyes, the images became more real. They shifted from driving my car off the dam road to grabbing razor blades from my drawer at home. The phrase, "up the tracks, not across the tracks," was playing in my head in the style of a 1950s showroom melody. I had already figured out what was wrong with my account, so I had no reason to go into the bank, but I couldn't go home. I couldn't drive. Both images scared me enough that I worried about both. So I called my therapist's office to ask for someone I could speak with. God bless the young girl who answered the phone because she was not prepared to deal with what she was about to get into. I explained my desperation of needing to talk to someone. She opened my chart and informed me that my therapist was on vacation for the next week. I again emphasized the importance of talking to someone. She suggested that she could cancel all of my appointments with my therapist and assign me a new one. No, that's not going to work. I just need to talk. She wasn't sure what to do. She fumbled around for a minute, trying to figure something out. There was a moment of awkward silence, and then click. She hung up on me. In the moment, it felt like she had given up on me, when in actuality, she probably just screwed up. I called back and got a different girl. She too had no solution for me. I did ask to speak to a manager, but I'm fairly certain they're all working from home now, and getting a manager on the phone right away wasn't feasible. She promised to have a manager call me. I told her about my images, and she was sincerely concerned, but she couldn't help me. I sat in the parking lot a little while longer, scared about what to do next. I received a call from my therapist's office after a few minutes, and the girl, Morgan, knew just what to do. She talked to me. She wasn't a therapist, but she cared. She took action. She asked if I was home, and I said no, but she had already called the police to do a wellness check on me. I told her I was heading home and that I needed to get home by 11 to return my rental with my wife. Sidebar, I am driving a rental car. After finding out my wife's cheating, I was asked by family to come home to Vegas so they could care for me. They suggested I bring my daughter. My wife suggested that I bring my 2 boys as well. A day before I was leaving, my car broke down. I had 2 bad engine mounts, a bad water pump, a broken fuse box, and bad spark plugs. I still really needed to go to Vegas. So I called my insurance, USAA, since I'm a veteran. The guy, who was also a Marine, was very helpful and told me that my insurance would cover the rental for mechanical reasons. After I got to Vegas, I was told that they wouldn't cover the rental, but I had already paid $622, $200 deposit. Sidebar, the girl was so sweet and listened to me that I started to cry while driving. In certain cases where I was explaining my story, I would start to sob. She stayed on the phone the whole time. I told her I was home. I told her I walked into the house. I was on speakerphone, and my wife could hear parts of the conversation. I hung up after thanking her and placed my head in my hand and gently sobbed. My wife isn't a monster. What she did to me was horrific, and she knows it, but she's not a monster. She had empathy, compassion. It didn't fill the void in my chest where my heart used to be. It wasn't helping. Then there was a loud knock on the door. She asked what that was, and I said it was the police. She was confused. She asked why they were there, and I said they were there for me. She was worried. She went to answer the door, and they explained in a little more detail why they were there. The two officers came into my bedroom. They were incredible. The female officer who was doing most of the talking instantly related to my daughter and my story. Her father committed suicide in prison. She talked about the void she has in her heart because of it. The male officer saw my USMC leg tattoo. He was a Marine. He started talking to me like a Marine. It helped, but they were dispatched to someone else, and the man shook my hand while the woman hugged me. They cared, and it felt good, but they were gone. My robotic wife sat down at her computer to go back to work as if nothing happened. I couldn't be there anymore. I said that over and over quietly to myself, but loud enough for my wife to hear it. I can't be here. I can't be here. I got in my car and my wife didn't chase after me. I was crushed. I got down the street and she called. I couldn't answer. She texted, "If you don't answer, I'm calling the cops to come find you." I didn't respond. She called again 2 more times, and I couldn't answer. She continued to text me without a response. "Okay, I'm calling them at 12:18 p.m. She called me again at 12:29 p.m. "They are going to call you at 12:32 p.m. The female officer that I spoke to before called me 6 times between 12:32 and 12:36. I couldn't answer. She even texted me. I was scared of these images in my head, and I did want to be somewhere safe. I drove to the police station and parked in the parking lot. I threw on some sad music and opened up Facebook, scrolling through 7 years of love and our family growth. I watched as my family turned from just me and my daughter into a family of 3, then into a family of 4, and finally into a family of 5. I absolutely love my family, but I couldn't answer the phone. Another officer kept calling from a blocked number. I did answer, but I wasn't very forthcoming with what was going on. I eventually hung up on him. I needed to get away. My family and I took our first family vacation up the Pacific Northwest last August into Vancouver, Canada. I got on the freeway and started to drive that way, but I couldn't do it. I turned around and started to head toward another city that was meaningful for my wife and me, but I couldn't do that either. While driving, I had a flash of a Catholic church in my head. I'm not religious, but I knew there would be someone I could talk to. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't a friend or a relative. I sat in the pew of this beautiful church. I had a moment just for me. It was peaceful and relaxing. It quieted the images in my head. While I sat there, I could breathe a little better. Eventually, I started to look around, and no one was coming to check on me. It wasn't like you see in the movies. My wife texted me again and called. "I can't help you if you don't talk to me." I went to the administration office and asked for a priest or a confession booth or something. The nice woman said that there was only one priest today, and he was out for an emergency. She said there would be 2 priests tomorrow and asked if I wanted to make an appointment. I politely said no and walked away. It was almost 2:45 p.m., and I knew my wife had an appointment for the dentist at 3 p.m. I got on the freeway and decided to head to that city I mentioned before. At this point, my family had been notified about my absence and started to call me and text, pleading for me to answer. I couldn't. I got into the slow lane because I couldn't continue to drive. Miraculously, my wife drove right by me on the freeway on the way to her appointment. I needed to be close to her, so I followed her. I parked in the parking lot of the dentist's office. I needed to see how worried she was. I needed her to feel the same level of anxiety that I felt the night I couldn't find her while she was cheating, but it didn't feel right. I couldn't sit there and stare at her car from the corner of the parking lot, so I drove back to the church. I sat in the same spot again in the pew, and the priest showed up. He pulled to a. Now the priest saw me breaking down and said he couldn't let me leave. He was mandated to call the police. We agreed he could call them. They showed up, and I shared my story with the 2 officers. The one male officer doing all of the talking was also 29 years old, like the female officer earlier in the day. But this time he was able to relate to me. He was also a Marine, and he had gone through almost identically the things I'm going through. I got these cops for a reason. Before they arrived, I finally called my wife and let her know that I was okay. I told her I was going away for a while, and she needed to come pick up the rental. She grabbed a mutual friend and came up. She told all of my family that I was all right. The moment I saw her in the same car as our friend, I broke down. She stepped out of the car and I could not face her physically. I physically could not have my chest face her direction. I couldn't have her see me like this. Both our friend and my wife stood in the parking lot, and the cop stopped them from walking up to me as I slid my body behind a pillar and wept. The deputy asked if it would be okay if my friend came over to me, and I nodded yes. The closer she came, the harder I cried. She grabbed me and I broke down. She held me up, kissed me on the cheek, and let me sob. I could feel the warmth, love, and concern from her. My friend asked if I wanted my wife to come over. I wanted my wife to come over more than anything. I've absolutely killed myself to be a better person for her, and I want her in my life. I wanted to fix all of the things I've done wrong, and I can't. It's over. I nodded that I wanted her to come over, but I still struggled with facing her. I felt like a toddler who refuses to face their parent when they're in trouble. The closer she got and the more she tried to stand in front of me, the more I cried. The more I turned my body away. The deputies asked if we wanted to go into a room together, and they would be there with us. They were incredibly protective of me. My friend walked up to my wife and angrily told her not to talk to me and just hold me. We went into a nearby room, and I grabbed her and held her and cried some more. I couldn't control this. I've never cried in my life. I'm sensitive and emotionally open, but I'm not a crier, and I was embarrassed with it all. We said our goodbyes, and I handed her the rental keys. The police put me in the back of their car and drove me to the hospital to speak to a crisis worker. I got some food, which was surprisingly good for a hospital. The nurses were incredible. They liked my mask and asked me about it. I bought it off Amazon. They listened to parts of my story, and we made fun of a drunk guy on a gurney as he belted out 2 tickets to paradise. I felt better. I had a long conversation with the crisis worker, and we agreed to create a safety plan. We identified my triggers and created responses that I could do to combat those tough moments. We agreed that I could leave since I was there voluntarily. So, I've been staying with my friends since Monday night and away from my wife. I don't know why I was having such a tough day. I think it had a lot to do with everything bad happening financially and watching my wife quickly move on with her life. She's still talking to the dude she cheated with. She likes him because he's the opposite of me. She was asking our neighbors on social media for TVs and printers for parts for this new guy to use for projects. It crushed me. For some reason, it made the last 7 years feel like they never mattered. I was overwhelmed with it all. I really am doing better. I got some medication to help me sleep. It's blocking out the bad images when I close my eyes at night, because every time I close my eyes, I see my wife's naked body lying next to a naked man. I see her kiss me goodbye the night she left to cheat. I hear her tell me she loves me as she left to cheat. I see the text telling me she was going to go play pool with a girlfriend that we both knew. I see the disgust, anger, and hatred in her body when I caught her cheating. I needed to not feel her anger and hatred. I needed her to feel what I felt. Update 2. Updated story of my wife cheating and life after. Hey folks. It's been over a year now since I've posted an update, and didn't think that I would post an update, because honestly, who cares about my life, right? I didn't think my story was any different than any other story people have shared. However, I've wrote fun. We all read so many stories every day about so many different events, and I've always wondered what the reality in those stories was, and how it differed from people's opinions who never lived it. It's been weird to experience people thinking they know my life better than I do. I've made mistakes, absolutely, and I'll continue to make them, but I always do my best to learn from those mistakes. Just as I try to be as honest with myself and the people listening to my story, I've been accused of exaggerating or lying my whole life, and I understand why. I'm too detailed, I'm too descriptive. It's the way my brain works. When I experience a traumatic event, I become a completely different person. The whole universe literally slows down for me, and I'm able to see everything and remember most everything down to the minute details. There was a similar situation for me in the Marines when I was attacked by a Marine and his wife. I was telling my story to my staff sergeant, and he called me a liar, while everyone else absolutely loved the story. But I digress. I promise to give you my truth to the best of my ability. And if you don't buy it or don't like it, that's okay. As the title suggests, my wife got arrested for domestic violence against me. Just a disclaimer, if you're new to my stories, I'm a writer, not in the sense that I'm a published author or anything, but I tell long stories. I'm sorry for that in advance if you decide to stay. So where to begin? I guess the best place to start is by saying that I'm doing okay. I'm not great, but I'm also not horrible. I've had a lot of ups and downs since the beginning of all of this. I also need to anonymously give shout-outs to my friends and family who have supported me over the last year. I tell them every day, but I feel it needs to be said here. The overwhelming patience, love, understanding, and sympathy you all have given me has been tremendous, and I thank you. And to those Redditors who have voluntarily come along this journey with me and have reached out to tell me how my story has moved them and offer their condolences, I thank you as well. Okay, let's get started. My ex moved out of the house fairly quickly after the scandal, almost a month after I caught her, to be exact. And about 2 weeks after she was arrested, she moved back to the apartment she had moved out of to begin her life with me. I did help her move into her new place, mostly because I feared she'd have the guy she cheated with come to my house to help move her belongings, and partly because I needed her out as quickly as possible so I could begin my healing process. I won't give many updates on how she's doing personally, as there really isn't a whole lot to say. Her life right now is no different than anyone else's life. She works constantly and pays for an overpriced place to live. I kept the house that we were renting. My biggest fear was being able to afford the rent on a single income because she and I made fairly comparable money. But to my surprise, I was shocked that not only was I able to cover all of my bills, but I had spending money to do things, which was awesome and weird and uncomfortable because we had been so tight with money for so long. I've learned that part of it was because I no longer had her debts. Part of it was because I reorganized my debts. And the last part was because I learned that she was bad at managing money. This next part is very important in my story, and I hope I help some of those who need it. I had been spending a lot of time with my therapist after the cheating. He was a relatively new therapist for me, and the first male therapist I ever had. As men, we're taught that society doesn't care about our feelings. I think Chris Rock said it best. Women, children, and dogs are the only things loved unconditionally. Men are only loved on the condition that they provide. As a result, men have 3 times higher suicide rates. Not many people ask us how we're doing, and if we do share how we're actually doing, the people don't care. That's why most of us just say we're all right. That's why I decided to go with a male therapist. My therapist before him suggested I would do better with a male, and that made me feel so uncomfortable. I've always picked women therapists because I felt that I could safely be vulnerable with them. But it never really did the trick for me. It almost felt like the female therapists, at least the ones I had, didn't know how to deal with a guy who was being that level of honest with their emotions. I learned that this opportunity with him forced me out of my comfort zone, and that's the only time we see real change in ourselves, when we step outside of that bubble. I was so fortunate because he was such a damn good therapist. Shortly after my breakdown, I have a new therapist, a female that I adore. I think she's great, but she's booked out so far in advance that it just makes it hard to build that bond. I've spent a lot of money and time trying to create a peaceful environment around me and focus on my self-care. Unfortunately, I spent an inordinate amount of time in my room, 8 hours for sleep, 8 hours for work, and I'm so exhausted of late that I can't do anything else. I'll stay in my room outside of work hours to watch TV or play games on my computer. So, I took an idea from TikTok and completely built clouds all over my ceiling, which is fairly large. It took me about a month of off and on work to complete. I'm not super handy or a DIY person, so I made some tiny mistakes. But honestly, I do love it. I bought Bluetooth LED lights, an essential oils diffuser with Bluetooth, and a premium sound Amazon Echo, and hooked them all up. I tell it to rain and the LED lights mimic lightning. The speakers play thunder, which is pretty hard hitting with a premium sound. I found some oil that smells like rain that the diffuser uses. I also bought a 50-inch Amazon Fire Stick TV for my meditation. I found a channel on YouTube called Meditative Mind that is very relaxing and has gorgeous visuals. I'm also in the process of building a smart mirror. I'm tweaking it a bit and adding a touchscreen sensor to the frame of the mirror and adding Alexa with blue LED lights that trigger on the wake word. My goal was to try new things that I don't normally do, and I've been enjoying it. Update 3, the kids and divorce. Moving on. Things with my kids are pretty good. My young boys are adjusting to the separation fairly well. They're both in daddy's boy phases and want to spend all their time with me. I'm sure in a few months they'll go back to being mama's boys. My daughter is doing okay. There were a lot of negative comments about her, and I'd like to ask that they not continue if at all possible. She was really put in an impossible situation, and no one here has walked in her shoes, not even me. She and I have both grown tremendously as father and daughter, and I'm so proud of her. We're both getting the help we need. She really is a great kid. As for the divorce, we both agreed to be amicable. As hard as it is for me not to try to absolutely bury her, that doesn't really serve our situation well, nor does it serve our children well. The best thing for the kids is to have 2 successful parents, not 2 parents who hate each other and fight all the time. She and I don't really get along well, but I think it's safe to say that we're both trying. I'd argue that she still acts like a BCH from time to time for absolutely no good reason, which makes things harder. We've had our ups and downs with the amicable divorce, though. We decided to split the cost 50-50, but she was getting to a point where she wasn't wanting to pay for a while. So, the process took a while to get started. Once we started going to our mediator appointments and started paying, we moved right along. But then, she got upset about some really stupid stuff and placed the entire thing on hold and threatened to take me to court because I didn't want to take her to Disneyland with tickets that I had purchased with an accident settlement I had while we were together. The kids, July heat in California, all the walking, 2 adults who don't get along, none of that sounded like it was going to be a good situation. So I went with the kids and my father. She was so upset that she wouldn't even talk about what her concerns were and just put the divorce on hold for months with no word. Once we finally got to talking again and agreed to move forward, our legal assistant abruptly died from a brain aneurysm. We got a new legal assistant who took over her caseload, and the divorce should be final any day now. The final paperwork was sent to the courts, and once we received the paperwork in the mail, signed by the judge, then it would be official. Update 4. Dating. I had, against the advice of just about everyone, joined a dating app. I needed to have someone to talk to, someone to flirt with, and who knows, someone that actually enjoys my company. As you can probably guess, it hasn't gone well. I've only made it out of first date status once. I was pretty honest with these women that I was still married, going through a divorce, and that it was pretty recent, and that was clearly red flags for them. I get it. But what they didn't get was that, despite those issues, I'm still the same person they enjoyed talking to and agreed to meet up with. I guess they just felt they didn't want any of that potential drama. Facebook dating lets you know if you have mutual friends with a person, and we had 3. It turned out that we actually had the same childhood friends, and that made everything between her and me so easy. She asked our friends about me, and I did the same, and they all raved about us to each other. It was an instant connection. She knew all the perfect things to say to me, which made sense because she was a social worker. She did so in a way that I pulled all my walls down, and for the first time in my life, I felt so freaking special and cared for. She works at one of the hospitals I worked for, and after a few days of talking, she asked if I'd bring her coffee so we could meet, and I agreed. She paid for the coffee. I picked it up and brought it to her. We talked in my car for about 20 minutes, and then she asked if I wanted to kiss her. When I say she was gorgeous, I mean she was gorgeous. So I said yes. Things were going so well between us that we were planning trips together. She got accepted to run the Chicago Marathon, so we booked flights together and really enjoyed one another's company. Then something changed. Her father got sick with cancer again, and her whole personality changed. I could feel her pulling away a little bit at a time. One night, she and I were supposed to spend time together, but she never responded to my text. She said she took a nap on the couch, but I could tell there was something off. I asked to speak to her on the phone, and she said no. I asked if I could come over to see her, and she said no. She essentially broke up with me through text and refused to ever see me again. All of the stuff that I had left at her place is probably still there or in the trash. She wouldn't let me grab anything, and we haven't seen each other since she decided, obviously, not to go to Chicago with me. She asked if I'd switch her flight tickets to a different seat for her so she could go with one of her girlfriends. Hold times are like 1 to 2 hours long for airlines, so I told her I didn't feel comfortable doing that, but she should have the ability to make the change. It's no problem, apparently. That pissed her off, as she didn't say another word. I got an email later that day stating some changes were made to the flight, and I haven't heard from her since. She had talked a lot about how bipolar her sister was and her dad's anger issues. As I reflect on it all, I almost wonder if she's bipolar and has anger issues. Update 5. My job. So I've been going through all of this trauma from my STBXW, the divorce being halted, the ex-girlfriend dogging me, and then I found out that I was being laid off from work in August. This was the 3rd round of layoffs for my company, and I had felt I was pretty safe because our team was the only one that was allowed to hire since we had so much work that needed to be done. For my particular job, I was the sole person providing support for 50 employees. But even I wasn't safe from the layoffs. They made me train my replacement and gave me a severance. This was a job that I loved in a company that I absolutely loved working for, but it was boring. There wasn't much work for me to do despite being the sole support for the whole system. As long as the system was working as it should, no support was ever needed. I was bored but content and loyal. When they say some doors close so others can open, they mean it. I started looking for a new job and I landed one at a phenomenal company that's literally a golden ticket on my resume. I doubled my salary and have been able to truly work on my self-care. I bought a new bicycle for trail rides and just bought a 2021 Subaru WRX STI, my dream car, along with volunteer work and other efforts to do new things. I signed up my oldest son earlier this year to play t-ball, and I coached his team. I absolutely love baseball, and I was quite the stud as a young man playing, so I was excited to coach for my first time. I absolutely loved it, and I got such a great reception from the kids and their parents. I signed up again for next year, and my youngest son will be playing his first year. When I say he's excited, I mean he's super excited. He even busts open the door when I'm going to the bathroom to ask me if I'll coach him next year. One of the moms even asked me out, although I didn't really feel a connection. One of the things my therapist suggested before he retired was a program called sproesketamine, which is essentially microdosed ketamine. It's typically used for people who have been resistant to antidepressants. My experience, Womath. You can go to SPO's website to look for local offices that offer this tip. They typically want you to have tried 3 different kinds of antidepressants before they try you on this. You can lie to them and say 3 types you've taken. Mindbloom is a website where you can get it sent to your house. I recommend the office route over the website route. If your insurance will cover it, it'll be cheaper. Other activities, as you can tell, I do enjoy writing. I'm currently working on about 11 books and short stories and 1 article about mental health. They're all a part of the same universe I created, except the article and short story. Mostly they are graphic novels and children's books. 5 sci-fi books, 3 children's books, 1 comedy book, 1 horror book, 1 short story, 1 article, and 1 summary. So to summarize, I'm still hurting a lot, but I could be a lot worse. I'm convinced that I'm going to be alone forever, partly because it's impossibly hard for a single dad with young kids to find a woman who wants to implant herself in a large family, and partly because I'm such a broken mess that I can't commit to anyone. My depression is so bad that my weight is getting really bad as a result. I did make an appointment with a doctor I think will help with the weight issues and exhaustion I've been experiencing. I lost my job but landed an even better one. My divorce should be final any day now. This process is absolutely not something you overcome in a short period of time. I was going through divorce care meetings, and one of the things they said felt so profound. When you are single, you are whole. Your spirit is whole. Then you meet someone and fall in love. You start a family with them, and your 2 souls merge into 1 larger soul. But when you go through a divorce, especially a traumatic one, your soul is literally ripped in half, and it takes a while for you to become whole while alone. That was the best summary I've heard to explain divorce and the pain. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.